My name is Derek Collins. I've been a prototyper and product designer at Netflix for the past 6 years. And one of the coolest things about working at Netflix, in my opinion, is that we've been able to create a platform where, for the first time in history, content creators can produce a movie or television series, and they can make that available to our customers around the world in nearly every country at the same time. But the road to get there has, of course, not been very easy, and we're still learning as we go. There's still a lot for us to figure out. And so today, I'd like to talk to you a bit about how we've been approaching designing and building a product for a global audience, how we uncover problems and opportunities in the markets that we tend to visit, and then how we run A/B tests to verify the various hypotheses that we come up with. So let's start off talking about how we've been approaching our global audience. And I want to just kick this off by saying this is just one approach. We're still figuring this out, and this is a big experiment for us. So I'm going to kind of walk you through. These are some of the new things that we've been doing. But first, I'm going to take a step back in time and kind of set some context for how we got to where we are now. Back in 2007, Netflix launched its first streaming video service on demand in the United States. And then a couple years later, we launched in our first international market in Canada. And then a year later, we were in Central and South America. And then we kind of had a big kickoff into the next 4 years. We launched in about 60 countries all over the globe. And at this point, the product strategy that we had was that building one global product experience was the best way for us to kind of scale across the globe. And that meant that our website looked exactly the same in the United States or other English-speaking countries as it did in places like Japan, for example, with the exception of the language changing, right? So our entire platform was the same for every person around the globe. But towards the end of 2015, we started to think about changing our strategy a little bit. And at the time, the way that we launched in a new market was we'd take a very white glove approach, right? We would kick up a big like launch strategy around getting content for, buying local content, things like that. We would translate the UI into the local language, and we would have these, big parties where Netflix executives and Hollywood folks would come out and kick off the launch of Netflix in a given country. And that was working quite well, but it was moving fairly slow as well. And so we made the decision in 2016 to just kind of flip the switch and turn Netflix on in every country around the globe, 190 countries total. And that's kind of where we're at today. But this also caused us to take a look at our kind of product strategy and say, the previous one of building one product experience, is that the best way to continue doing things? And so we started to kick around this hypothesis, just an idea, of maybe we should think about building regional product experiences, and that might actually help us grow faster in some of these different markets. And we weren't sure exactly how we were going to do that, but one of the ways we thought we might dip our toe in the water is to start these product immersions. And this was the idea that we would take a very small, agile product team and put them into a market for a long period of time and let them kind of immerse themselves in this market and understand the people and the cultural differences in that area better. Up until this point, we had been doing research in all these markets, of course, but we might do that over a period of a week or 2 weeks and then come back and, spin up tests around that kind of thing. And we thought maybe if people are in market for longer periods of time, we might learn faster. So I joined a team. We put together this small team here with a product manager, a designer, a prototyper, that was myself, a researcher, and a localization expert. And we went off to Japan, and we lived in Tokyo for about 2 months, maybe a little over 2 months. And we just spent our time there doing a lot of qualitative research and trying to find out what the different problems and opportunities were. And I'm going to get into those further later. But the main thing is that we learned a lot from this experience and came back with a lot of really interesting insights. We wanted to see if that would continue to work in other markets. So when we got back, we kind of took a look at the team that we had, and we thought, where's another market that we might want to go to? And this time we decided to add a few folks to the team. We added a content designer, or a UX writer, and we added a UI engineer. And the reason we did this was because we found that the way that we portray the product, the language that we use, is actually quite important in some of these different regional contexts where things may vary between our culture and other cultures, right? And so we wanted to make sure we had an expert with us that could take care of some of that stuff. And then we had a UI engineer because when we got back from Japan, we found that we were excited, wanted to spin up all these fun tests, but the engineers had different ideas. They hadn't stopped working for the 2 months we were there, and so we just didn't fit into their priorities. So we had to wait a few months before we could spin up some of those tests. We thought if we brought a UI engineer with us, not only would we benefit from getting a different perspective, someone different, working on a different part of the product than our design teams were, but also that they would be the kind of the primary person to build some of these experiences when we got back. So we sent this team to India. I joined this team as well, and I lived in Mumbai for about 2 months. And we explored, a lot of different regions, including Chennai. One of the reasons we went down to Chennai was because not only are the languages different down there, but the content preferences, the entertainment preferences are a lot different than they are in Mumbai. After we got back, we tried to figure out how could we scale this across the whole company. It was actually kind of difficult to get people to kind of uproot their lives, leave their families, and move to a new country for 2 months. And we just knew that as much as we were learning, we probably weren't going to get a whole lot of people to be able to do this over and over and over again. So we decided to put together a regional product team. Now, this is kind of the newest experience for us right now. This is a team I'll be joining in September. And the idea here is that we'll have a full-time, regionally focused product team that can hopefully design and test non-member experiences much faster than we could with our kind of globally focused teams, right? So again, this is a big experiment for us, and we'll see how this turns out. Maybe I can come back and speak about that another time. This team's going to look a little bit different. In addition to the kind of product team that we had before, we're going to add a full stack engineering team with the idea that we should be able to spin up and run any test and market that we want to without having to rely on the rest of the engineering teams back in LG, Los Gatos. So that's kind of how we've been approaching learning about and designing these experiences for a global audience. So now let's talk about how we go about uncovering problems and opportunities once we're there. So what did we do when we were in Japan? What did we do when we were in India? There's kind of two main research methods that we tend to utilize, and that's quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative research is kind of things that you can quantify based on actual numbers and real data. So you can draw conclusions from that you feel pretty good about because you usually have large data sets to work with. Qualitative research, on the other hand, is going and actually talking to your customers. You have a much smaller pool of people that you're talking to, but it helps you kind of fill in some of the blanks that maybe the quantitative data left behind. The way I like to think about this is the quantitative helps you figure out what's going on. Hey, there's a drop in our funnel at this point. The qualitative data helps you fill in the why. Why is that happening? What are the customer behaviors that are resulting in that drop, right? So you have to use a combination of these two things. They work hand in hand to start to paint a picture of what's going on. So in Japan, we decided to take the approach of not doing a ton of work up front. We didn't do a lot of quantitative research in the beginning. And the reason for that is that we didn't want to bias ourselves towards one problem or another. We thought, the whole point of the immersion is to get people to go into market and be there and kind of let the problems come to them. Let's discover what's going on there, right? And that actually worked pretty well for us, I think. What we ended up doing was we did things like shadowing. So this sounds a little strange. But basically, for a week, I followed this guy around here. His name was Ryu. And he's a student at an international university in Tokyo. He speaks great English, which is good for me because I don't speak any Japanese. And this is where they invited me out with some of his friends. This is their place to go after school, get drinks, relax. Funny thing is, when I got there, these two had ordered me hot dogs and French fries. They thought that's what Americans would like to eat. And I appreciated it, but I also got to have a lot of the local cuisine as well. And this was a great way to kind of slide into the research, right? This is my first time in Japan. This gave me kind of a perspective of one person's kind of life there and what life is like. And he was able to show me a lot around his school, the classes that he goes to, hanging out with his friends, how he commutes, things like that. And then we dove into this in-home research. So this is where we actually went into people's houses. We spent maybe 3 or 4 hours with them asking all kinds of different questions. These questions were pretty broad. The idea was to try and get an understanding of what life is like for our customers and then how entertainment fits into their lives. They would show us, where they would watch movies and TV shows, the different devices that they had, things like that. And then we also visited our customer support center. So this is the customer support center in Tokyo. They handle customer support for Japan and Korea. And they were able to kind of show us a little bit about the different trends that they see. What are the top problems and issues that people are calling in with? What do most people, what are the questions that they have, right? And so we took all of this information that we had, all the data that we had collected so far from the qualitative research we had done, and we knew that some of these themes were starting to kind of be pulled out. So we got all of our different ideas and thoughts organized by theme, and then we prioritized those based on what did we think would have the biggest impact on our customers, and what did we think would have the biggest impact on our business. And then, of course, we designed different experiences, and we built prototypes, and then we did evaluative research. So this is another type of qualitative research that we tend to do. I built this prototype here on the phone, and this was kind of a whole new homepage experience and going through our whole sign-up funnel. And we would have a moderator and a participant in one room, and then kind of the designers behind the two-way mirror in the back observing what was going on, right? And this just helps us determine if the designs, the concepts, the ideas that we have are moving in the right direction. Are they actually starting to solve some of the problems that we're seeing or not, right? And then we can iterate on these, build new experiences, and go back and do the same thing. So this is some of the type of research that we were doing in Japan. In India, we took a slightly different approach. Again, keep in mind, this is a big experiment for us, so we're trying to figure out what's the best way that we should do this, right? In India, we actually did a ton of research up front. We used all of our qualitative data, worked with our consumer insights team and our data scientists to try and figure out what's actually happening in India. And we did the same thing where we organized by theme, but this time we did that before we even landed in Mumbai, right? And so we went in with some idea of what we thought some of the problems were. And the benefit to this in hindsight now is that we were actually able to make our questions much more pointed. So when we got into some of this in-home work where we sit down with people, and again, they show us, how entertainment fits into their lives, we were able to kind of get through this in maybe an hour or 2 hours instead of 4. And this allowed us to see more people over time. So again, we spent time with people showing us, where they watch TV, where they do they watch by themselves, do they watch with other people, what is it like for them to hear about Netflix and sign up for Netflix, things like that. And then, of course, we did evaluative research again. This is in the basement of a hotel in Mumbai, the participant and the moderator in another room, and then they are filming that, and we were watching it from the other room. So just to kind of recap these different quantitative and qualitative research methods that you can employ, quantitative things include things like funnel analysis, heat mapping and eye tracking, customer surveys, and segmentation analysis. These are all things that we use. On the qualitative side, these are customer interviews, customer diaries, so asking people to actually keep a diary for a period of time to understand what their life is like. Evaluative research, so building prototypes and then putting them in front of customers and trying to understand if we're on the right path. And then customer support contacts. This is just talking to your customer support teams or sales teams and trying to hear the things that they hear every day. Now at Netflix, we have the opportunity to do a lot of this stuff because we have a lot of resources at our disposal. But that doesn't mean that if you're a startup or a smaller company or a smaller team, you can't do the same exact type of research. There's a lot of free and low-cost tools out there that can help you do this. So if you're looking at something like funnel analysis, Google Analytics can handle that for you. Crazy Egg does a lot of heat mapping. Where do people click on your pages? You can run customer surveys with SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, Qualaroo, certain tools like that. And then on the qualitative side, you can simply use something like Google Hangouts. I've done this before. You call up your customers, or email them and ask, would you be willing to share your screen with me and walk through how you use our product? You can find some pretty, surprising results that way. And then if you want to conduct evaluative research with prototypes, you can use things like user testing and look back. Both of these tools allow you to do moderated or unmoderated sessions remotely, so you don't need to be there with them. We've used user testing to run tests in India, for example. And then again, talking to your customer support teams, jumping on the customer support emails yourself, talking to your sales teams, things like that. You can get a lot of insights that way. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this is get out and talk to your customers or get on the phone or email them, whatever you have to do, because they're going to reveal a lot of things that you probably didn't think about. So that's a little bit about the types of methods we use to uncover problems and opportunities. And now let's talk a little bit about A/B testing. So we A/B test pretty much everything at Netflix. And the way you want to kick these off, and at least in my opinion, is make sure you're very clear about what the people problem is. The clearer you are about the problem you're trying to solve, the easier it's going to be to come up with solutions to those problems. So let's take a quick look at a hypothetical people problem. We'll use this example to talk through how we conduct A/B tests. So let's say that we found that people aren't very familiar with our brand, and therefore they're pretty hesitant to sign up. And so after we kind of understand that this is the problem, we're going to come up with a hypothesis to talk about how we might solve this problem. And there's 3 elements that I think make a good hypothesis. You want to mention the thing that you're going to be changing, the behavior that will result from that change, and then the business metrics that you think will be affected by that change. So if we put that into a sentence, it looks something like this. If we do this, then this behavior will change, and these metrics will be affected. So using our hypothetical example, let's kind of continue that. Here's one potential solution we could use. If we add customer testimonials to our homepage, then potential customers will trust us more and signups will increase. So here's those 3 things that I talked about. The thing that we're going to change is we're going to add customer testimonials. The behavior that we think is going to change is potential customers will trust us more after reading those testimonials. And then the business metrics so that people are going to sign up. After I have my people problem and my hypothesis, I like to put together a test spec. And what this is just a document that you can use to keep track of everything that you're going to do for this test. There's lots of different ways to do this. This is the way I like to put together a spec. So I typically start, this is just like a Google document, for example. I typically start with setting some context or background. How did we discover this was a problem? What data, both qualitatively and quantitatively, do we have to back up that this is an actual problem? And then how do we know that it's a real problem we need to fix? Is it important to our business? And then, of course, I add my hypothesis in there. And then down below, this is where we start to design the test. I typically work with a data scientist to make sure that these cells are accurate, but to keep things very simple, let's just stick with our kind of A-B here. We have a control experience, which is the experience we have today, and then we're gonna have our new experience, and I add a little description of what that might be. And then I point out my test metrics. In this case, it's gonna be to increase signups. And sometimes you might wanna add a secondary metric to that. The secondary metric I have here is that not only are we gonna increase signups, but I hope that we're actually gonna convert some of those people to paid users. And so maybe this design will do a great job of making people sign up, but not a very good job of helping people actually become paid customers. So sometimes it's good to pay attention to those secondary metrics, right? And then I add my design below. I don't have any designs in here, but you can imagine just static images of what the control experience is like and what our new experience is going to look like. And that's to give people context and to see what, what's going to be changing between the two. Then I'll link off to my design files, either Sketch or Prototype, for example, that the UI engineers can use to build this. And then I always have this open question section at the end. This is to keep track of any discussions and any decisions that get made, so we can always refer back to that and know why we ended up where we did. Now we're ready for our A/B test. So, in its simplest terms, today we have 100% of our people coming into our one website, right? But now we've designed a new experience. We've added these cute little customer testimonials down here. So this gives us our A version and our B version. These are our test cells. This is our control, and this is our new variant, right? Whatever A/B testing tool you're using should help you split your traffic roughly in half. You're going to send 50% of your people to A and 50% of your people to B. And then what we're going to do is analyze the results of that. Did one of those result in more signups or not, right? So here's what some results might look like. Again, these are very simplified. Here's our A version, our control, and our B, the new variant. We had about 5,000 people come through each of those different experiences. And look, we got about a 1% increase in signups from version B. Great, right? We should ship this right now and bank those wins. But maybe not so fast. How do we know that we can trust that these results are real, right? And this is where we start to talk about things like statistical significance. But I'm going to give you another term to start to think about, because this is much more in your control here, and it's a little easier to figure out. Statistical power. You don't really need to know what this is, but the main thing is you need to know is that power equals confidence. The higher power your test is, the more confident you can be in the results. So there are two things you can do to increase statistical power in your tests. One is you can increase the effect size. So make sure you're testing more bold hypotheses. As kind of a stupid example, let's say you have the logo on your website, it's currently 75 pixels, and you want to increase that to 100 pixels. The effect size is pretty small. It's going to be very difficult to measure any change there. But let's say you want to increase it to 250 pixels. That might be a much larger increase, so the effect size might be a little bit bigger. I know that's a dumb example, but just the idea that you want to test like very disparate hypotheses, right? or disparate experiences. The second way that you can increase the power of your test is to increase the sample size. Simply have more people come through the test. So I always have a lot of people ask, well, how many people do I need to run this test? How long should I let the test run? And there's some calculators that can help you figure this out. You can either do this during the test, like as we're kind of taking a look at our example here, or you can do it before the test to try and figure out some of the numbers that you need to have. So there's a lot of these calculators out here. I'm pointing you to one of these. If you use this shortened link here, A/B test power calc, you'll kind of see the calculator. It's very ugly, but I'm going to walk you through what numbers to plug in here. So sample 1 just means our A, our control. You're going to start with a base of 0.5. You don't really need to know what that's about. Just put in 0.5 and trust me on that. And then you're going to have a sample size of 5,000. That's how many people we had come through our A version. We're going to do the same thing for B. So in this case, we increased our base by 1%. So add 0.01 to 0.5, we get 0.51, right? That's our change. And then we have a 5,000 again because we had 5,000 people go through that. And then the last two are usually set defaults already, so you don't need to change them. The significance level of 0.05 is just an industry standard. It means that we're 95% confident that the results we're going to see could be repeated over and over again, and we'll see that same result 95% of the time. That does mean that 5% of the time we could actually be wrong, but this is kind of the industry accepted standard. This is used in medical standards and all kinds of other statistical standards. And then you have a one-tailed or two-tailed hypothesis. I'm not the best person to talk about this, but basically it means if you have this kind of bell curve of your test results, you're looking at both tails instead of just one of them. So if we go back to our test, here we have 5,000 people. We've got an increase of 1%. Let's see if we can trust these results. If we plug those numbers into that calculator just like we did, we're going to find out that our result's not significant. So we probably shouldn't trust these numbers right now, but what can we do to make sure that we can trust the results of this test? So I think that our effect size is pretty good. We went from having no testimonials on the homepage to adding these new testimonials, right? So the thing that we can probably affect the most is to increase the amount of people coming through the test. So how do we do that? We just simply wait. Maybe we wait another week, maybe we wait another month. It depends on how much traffic you're getting. Let's say we wait a month, and now we've got 25,000 people that have seen this experience. And our plus 1% has remained steady. So that's good. That's a good sign, right? If we run these same numbers through the calculator, but now with 25,000 people, we will find that we have a significant result. That means we can trust this, and we should launch this experience out. It's going to do better than the current experience that we have. But A/B testing is not a perfect science. It's never going to be 100% correct. That's why you have to combine it with all the quantitative and qualitative data you had before. All of that paints a picture that can give you a holistic look at the results of something like this. So you don't want to just trust your A/B test results. You don't want to just trust your quantitative data. You don't want to just trust your qualitative data. All of those things together give you a better idea of whether or not this is a successful test. So let's walk through a real-world example from some of our time in Japan. So one of the problems we uncovered there, just as a general problem, was that we found that people in Japan are relatively unfamiliar with streaming video on demand. And so we thought through how are some of the ways that we can help make this better for our potential customers. And one of the simple ways that we thought we could do this is just on our homepage, make sure that we explain what Netflix is and what streaming video is in much more literal and concrete ways, right? And if we point out those kind of three things that we want to have in our hypothesis, the thing we're going to change is we're going to communicate the basics of Netflix in more literal ways. We're going to help, hopefully, the behavior is going to change prospective members to better understand what Netflix is. And then the business metrics we're going to look at are increasing signups and revenue. So here was the experience that we had as our control. This is what our homepage looked like at the time. It's pretty sparse, and see what's next, watch anywhere, cancel anytime doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what Netflix is if you're not familiar with Netflix as a service or what streaming video is necessarily. Then we had these three sections at the bottom that you could click on. Again, pretty sparse information, kind of vague, right? So we put together a new design where we went kind of overboard on being very, very literal about how the free trial works, for example. This was something else that people had a hard time understanding. which devices could you watch Netflix on? We had a lot of people say like, well, this is online streaming, so how do I get it on my TV? I guess I just have to watch it on my laptop. So we kind of want to be very clear. You can watch this on your TV. You can do it using a smart TV or game consoles, things like that, right? Talking about mobile, being able to download shows there, and then kind of this catch-all watch everywhere, look at all the devices that you can watch on. And there was actually video running in some of these to show the actual UI running on those devices. And then we added an FAQ at the bottom, which might seem kind of strange, but this was a pattern that we saw on a lot of different websites throughout Japan. It's a very high context culture. They love to dig into the details of something like this. And here were our results. We actually found that some of our hypotheses were correct, that it actually did increase signups. Some others were not. And the reason we have more than just 2 cells here is because we tested a lot of different varieties of those different modules you saw. We tested different orders of them. We tested different modules. Some of the pages were much longer, included much more information. Some were shorter. We wanted to kind of tease out the details of that design since it was so different than the current design that we had. One thing to keep in mind, though, is as you increase the number of cells you have, you're going to increase the time that you have to let this test run because you need more and more people to come through it in order to determine if it's significant or not, right? So while this was a nice, successful test, the vast majority of our tests look like this. They typically end up being negative. And you would think that this is a bad thing, but it actually isn't, because you can learn something from this, right? We had a hypothesis, and we proved that it wasn't correct. We proved that the behavior we thought we were going to change didn't change. And so we learned something from that. You can bank that learning and use that in future tests, right? So that's a bit about how we do A/B testing at Netflix, and I hope you've been able to take away a little bit about how we've gone about building a product for a global audience, how we uncover problems and opportunities, and how we tend to run A/B tests. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time and patience. I appreciate it.